Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the MarketLeaf Solutions Legal Marketing Podcast. Here again with my friend and colleague, Matt Holmes. Matt, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on. I thought we'd talk a little bit today about a topic that maybe doesn't get quite as much airtime with people, but still is really important when it comes to the day to day execution of sales for law firm or really any company. And that is having the right people on your phone team and your phone sales team. How to hire them, how to find them, ultimately how to train them and put them in a position to succeed for your firm as well. So a little bit outside the box, maybe doesn't get quite as much love as some other marketing topics that you see online, but I know that with your lengthy career in sales and marketing, I know you've done a fair bit of sales training yourself with these types of folks, and thought it'd be great to have you share your expertise and your experience on this type of topic today.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And actually, this topic is kind of near and dear to my heart. I did kind of cut my teeth in sales, and my first job ever was probably selling newspaper subscriptions door to door, and that's the quickest way to figure out what's working and what's not working, right?
Have a few doors
And
slammed in your face, right? I'm sure that's
it
a
may
good
it may
way
have
to get some
happened a
feedback.
couple of times. It may have happened. And so those lessons, that you learn early, you can apply them obviously later in life. And we won't get stuck on this little area here, but happy to share what I know and happy to dig in.
Well, it's great to have you on today to discuss this. And Matt, we're in 2020, right? Everyone focuses on the online funnel, your sales funnel, your ads, your landing pages, social media, etc. And sometimes, phone, print, some of these old methods get a little bit left behind, right? But the reality is that today, at least for law firms, you're still trying to get people on the phone for an appointment or for an initial introductory call, right? And ultimately, no matter how good your website works, how well or how effective your ads are, you still have to be effective once you get people actually on the phone. So from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see just in dealing with sales professionals on the phone in general who are trying to book that initial appointment or make that initial sale? What are some of the things that you see even today firms still struggle with when it comes to phone effectiveness?
Sure. Well, I'm going to tell you, a lot of managers aren't going to like this answer, but a lot of times it's the leadership. That's it usually starts there, right? Um, Being on the phones is tough. Being on the phones is hard, and I think people that are typically on the phones often and uh, and are expected to perform don't often get compensated in the ways that other folks in the sales role might, right? And I feel that should probably change if you want your results to change. In sales, it would be ridiculous to think that you wouldn't be compensated for being extra successful at your job. But I think that's what a lot of firms are expecting. They pay an hourly, they want high results, and they don't many times get them, and they wonder, well, why would that be? And a lot of times is you're not showing your team the respect that they deserve. All right. So I'll get off my soapbox there. But let's say you are a manager who's doing the right thing, right? Um, a couple of things that you can do to make sure you're getting the most out of your team is to make sure that they understand the benefit that they're giving the company, what the front lines of the company really mean to the bottom line, and you have to incent them, right? And certain folks are motivated in different ways. Some folks are motivated by money, so have those types of bonuses out there for high performers or for folks that are even meeting your daily standard for calls booked or whatever some of your daily standards are. Have some daily standards so people know what their expectations are.
Oh, certainly.
Um, but yeah, but I might just wrap up quickly here with you know, I think a lot of times sales managers want to squeeze more juice, out of that lemon, right? And sometimes you just need to find a different lemon. So let's just face that reality as well. Sometimes, you might just need to go with a different talent than the one that you're working with. An old manager of mine great piece of advice. Used to say, you know what, Matt, I'm not looking to motivate anybody. I'm looking to work with motivated people. And that's always kind of stuck with me because the people who are naturally motivated just make life a lot easier, right? Especially in a professional environment. They want to get the job done. You want them to get the job done. Let's get the job done. People you have to drag to the finish line, it's as a manager, it's just so demotivational. And if your job is to be the rah 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 gal or guy, it's hard to do that when the team's kind of like the anchor. So you're in full control of that, right? If the team isn't doing what you want, maybe it's time to find a different team or get better at your management skills so you know how to get the most out of them. I won't get into a lot of the management skills like right now, but that's a great way to affect change immediately is make sure that the chemistry is there with your existing teammates. And if it's not, try to find some folks that you're going to gel with and whose goals kind of match up with yours. And that's a great way to start things off on the right foot.
Yeah, Matt, you touched on two really great points, which come to alignment or really misalignment, right? One between the incentives and the salesperson itself, in having, making sure that the person is motivated by the outcomes that they're working to drive as opposed to just having some unreal expectations, right? I think that's a huge thing that you see in people just sort of expecting someone on an hourly rate or, with a certain quota per month to show up and hit it without any sort of underlying incentive to get better or improve or ultimately drive greater outcomes. It's just meet the mark and you're done, right? But then you touched on the second point of what, as well as alignment between the talent and the mission, because sales in general is difficult, but sales over the phone is especially difficult because you lose that ability and that opportunity to have the nonverbal cues through body language and through other
That's key.
factors that you
Yep.
would otherwise be able to kind of manipulate or impact to affect your outcome for a potential sale, right? And so you have to have a certain level of nuance over the phone. And I think that's something that really gets overlooked when people are not only considering the talent they already have on board, but are overlooking when they're looking to bring someone onto their team as well, right? And considering what factors make that type of person successful in that type of role. And you touched on sometimes you just have to go find a different lemon. You have to go find people with the sales, savvy or skills and conversational skills to be able to handle that type of interaction. And it can be pressure filled because you feel like you have to accomplish so much with so little because it is all directed through the medium of the phone call itself and you can't impact anything through those nonverbal cues. So Matt, let's say you are going out and you're trying to find the right people with the right skills. What are a couple of the characteristics or maybe even backgrounds or certain experiences that you've seen in training or hiring people in the past that have been good indicators to you that someone has the chops to be successful in selling over the phone? Are there a couple key things that you've maybe seen have become patterns in terms of you saw this on a resume or you saw this in speaking to someone and then that really translated into success over in a phone sales type role?
Hmm. No, yeah, that's a good question. So personally, I've always built sales teams, right? So I'm going to approach that answer with kind of that context in mind. And with that, I like to try to hire people that have an athletic background or have some type of competitive something about them. Maybe they do competitive chess. Maybe they're a competitive gymnast. Maybe they're a competitive mathlete. Maybe they are into rugby, water polo. I don't care, but maybe they're a musician. Um, there are a number of kind of I don't know, competitive traits that I find interesting in sales, especially when you have a sales team, because I touched on it briefly, but not everyone's motivated by money. Some people are motivated by a little competitive nature, right? They just want to beat the guy next to them. Some people are motivated by, just being the best. Some people are motivated by Just having someone tell them they've done a good job, right? It's a factor, but when I'm building a team, especially, I will say that I like people with some type of sports background or some type of competitive something, right? So that's one. But I don't necessarily need people to have majored in sales and marketing to the work, right? I think anyone that genuinely likes to speak with people and is maybe innate this could be, good at the role. I could see anyone who's waited tables before being good at a sales role on the phone. I could see someone who's worked with the public, whether they are a bank teller or what they work at a gas station. If you're good with people, you're good with people. On the phone, though, um, I do feel that it does take a little bit extra, and that extra is typically the listening skills, which like 97% of the public, probably including myself, could stand to improve their listening skills, active listening skills, right? You made a really good point. When I earlier, John, when I moved into phone work from face-to-face work, it was so much more difficult to pick up on cues, right? Because I didn't have the body language. I couldn't adjust kind of my approach based on how someone carried their face or their posture or the tone of their voice. Um, Actually, on the phone, tone of voice matters a whole lot. But you'll never pick up those nuances if you're talking too much or if you're just thinking about the next thing that you want to say versus active listening. So that's a great soft skill if you can find someone that has that. Um, I do think that there's a danger of trying to look at a resume and going, hey, that person will be good at this because they've got this on their resume. I think that's dangerous. I think resumes could be helpful in leading in the right direction, but ultimately pick up the phone and talk to them. We're in COVID times, so face-to-face interviews aren't happening anyway. How do they carry themselves on the phone? That's the absolutely best way to interview people for a phone role is to talk to them on the phone.
Right. And
So
it's more important than ever
I think
because who
people
knows
are in
when
a
we'll be
good
going
spot
back.
there.
Well, no, Matt, that's a
Yeah.
terrific point. And I think it comes down to, as you talked about, the resume is one thing, but it's not everything, right? And that's really for any role. I think one thing that really stands out in talking to people on the phone is for as much as you don't get the nonverbal by being over that type of medium, you can almost hear, you know, it sounds weird, but you can almost see people's faces through their tonality, through their pacing, through their even style of speaking, right? You can almost build this mental picture, and maybe that's just the some human psychology at play and how we grow up and learning how to communicate. But you really do get a good sense for someone's savviness just through an initial phone call. I feel, at least when it comes to trying to vet some of these prospects you may be considering to bring in. And I think a big part of that is just understanding whether you can connect with this person at a very human to human level, right? Before you're even getting into a conversation about, how would you ask someone to sell your firm, or how would you approach someone to, or how would you ask someone to approach a sales pitch? You can pick up on a lot just by having a simple conversation, right? Even if it's even if it's as things as simple as the weather, or how they're holding up during COVID times, or whatever may be going on locally that week. I think you do really have to focus on how does this person communicate at just a very simplistic level, and does it feel painful? Does it feel awkward? Right? Are there awkward silences? Can they keep the flow of the conversation going? Can they pick up where maybe the other party has left off with a shorter answer, or where the other party maybe isn't communicating as much? And I think those types of skills are something that you can get from a resume. You can't see from just previous job experience, but you have to really get on the phone and understand that. And I think those things are a big factor when it comes to these types of sales teams, especially for law firms, because put yourself in the shoes of the prospective client who's calling you. They're probably coming from an emotional place, a place of vulnerability, a place of uncertainty where they don't know the next steps forward, where they're looking for guidance. And so those aren't going to be the easiest conversations to have, right? And so I feel like getting to understand how, the people that you have on your phone team are able to communicate at a very human to human level when there is that vulnerability there, when there is that kind of raw human emotion, is really important, because you can't necessarily have someone who's really slick on the phone and really polished. And not to say that they shouldn't be sharp or shouldn't be knowledgeable, but they have to be genuine and authentic. And I think that's a huge challenge that can be very difficult to find in people. So, Matt, from your experience, how are you able to kind of parse out the people who are more authentic, versus maybe some of the slick talkers who you can tell are, more used to reading from a script? Do you have any tips or
Mhm.
recommendations on how to find people who connect at that really genuine level?
Well, I always start in house, right? If you got good people working for you, they probably know other good people, right? So if you're actively looking to hire more people to be your front lines, some intakers maybe, then you're going to want to hire people that kind of match your own values. And so look inward first. I think that's a huge just area of untapped talent that kind of enterprises are good at tapping. They usually kind of have some like referral programs or maybe an incentive in place, $500 for a referral or something like that. But maybe smaller firms don't have that kind of thing in place, and so people maybe just not top of mind, right? But that's definitely an area to mine. I would recommend that. Um, and you know, I think if we look at, and I do have a bit of a recruiting background in my history. Used to do a lot of hiring and interviewing, and I think times have changed, and I think the resume is probably on its way out. And I think tools like LinkedIn or Zoom or Loom, where you can have a video representation of yourself, and actually show people a little bit more about you versus just a static resume. Or maybe if we're talking LinkedIn, you've got some recommendations from someone else, or you've got the fact that you've got nonprofit experience in your background. There might be some clues that help get you there. Nothing's going to replace a one-on-one interview, but given the fact that everyone's using Zoom now, even like my 7-year-old, uh, you could probably do some video resumes these days and really get to the heart of the matter, and put people through some behavioral paces, maybe come up with a fictional type of scenario and ask them how they might walk through that with a prospective client and see how they do it. um you know I, I don't want to crap on scripts, because I think they can be helpful so long as someone makes it their own and doesn't come off sounding too robotic. I think they can be helpful as a skeleton and as a tool for getting better, if they don't come off like they're reading. Um, but I do think that when you're um, looking for someone who's got that empathy gene, um, that's one of those skills that you just really cannot find on paper. But maybe looking at the nonprofit experience, maybe if they work with like shelters for animals and things like that, then certainly there's something about them that's not purely um, you know money motivated, and that might be a great place to start. No magic bullets, but that might be one little clue right there.
That's a great recommendation, Matt, because people who are involved in those types of activities, especially if they have to do phone outreach for fundraising or for advocacy efforts, whatever it may be, it really isn't money motivated, right? And those are the most emotional, or empathetic scenarios in which people are placing themselves in trying to make those types of pitches over the phone. And I think you just develop a different skill set that way, right? You learn to approach phone conversations from a different angle and just from a different mindset overall. I think so. That's a terrific recommendation. Um, so let's skip ahead for a second. Let's say people are taking your advice. They've got some great referrals for candidates. from maybe their in-house team or in doing some of the research through the tips that you recommended. Let's say they find the right person and they're ready to onboard them. Now here's the second biggest challenge is you found this talented person, you're ready to bring them onto your team, but there's this natural gap that you have to bridge. And that is, how do you get this person to really communicate what it is that your firm does, the value that you provide, the specific differentiating points or whatever it may be that really separate your firm from other firms in the market? How do you educate and onboard this person so that they're ready to speak to the things that make your firm great and why you're the right solution to help prospective clients when they're calling you? How do you overcome that gap? Because it's difficult enough to find those people, right, to bring onto your team, but now to really get them in the swing of things and speaking to the key points that really highlight why your firm is the right solution. How do you go about doing that? Because we get a lot of questions on, how to just come up with kind of the right training and the right tips to get salespeople to where they need to be in speaking about their new firm.
Sure. Well, I think any company that's going to thrive usually has some type of, promote from within program. So hopefully, whoever is in sales management or in taking management or whatever we're deeming the term at the firm we're speaking of, um, if they had some time in the trenches, then they're going to be so much better as a manager, right? So um, if we're onboarding someone, then that person would obviously, be able to empathize with first day jitters, with, oh, I don't know anybody in the cafeteria, with, oh, that's the big boss. I wonder if he knows my name. How do I introduce myself? Like all the weird stuff. If you're a manager, it's your job to remove all that friction in the first 2 weeks as soon as physically possible. Because the job interview didn't stop the moment that they said yes. I think it's still a good job market for a pro candidate that has options, right? And even with the economy the way it is, I think good people are still in high demand, right? And letting this person know that you're there to help them, to remove roadblocks, to make them as comfortable as possible, shows an investment of your time and effort into their development, and really goes a long way towards, building a solid relationship, with your new hire. I think when they sign the employment, stuff and all the paperwork's done, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, let's get to work. You know, I don't think employers have that type of leeway these days because folks these days can easily walk, regardless of having gone through a lengthy interview process. If it doesn't feel right, I think a lot of people have options these days. So if you're trying to attract people, good people, you want to make sure that they're welcomed, that they understand how their contribution affects the company as a whole. I think people like to be part of a bigger thing than themselves. That you're there to help them, succeed. Um, and it's honestly giving them something about the company to be proud about, right? I really do feel that, when you have a company like, and this is like a B2C example, like Tom's, who gives away a pair of shoes for every pair of shoes that they sell. Companies that work for a company, or employees that work for a company like that don't have to question that company's values, right? They feel good about working there. They'll maybe even give it a little extra because there's a mission behind, what they're doing. So it's not bad if you don't have a mission statement, or if you don't have some type of charitable aspect of the role, if you don't have some type of, hey, we're trying to do good things for the community, consider adding it to the game plan, because millennials and Gen Z especially, they're looking for companies that are looking to not just move the needle from a financial standpoint, but from a social good standpoint. And that's a reality. So I think you need to adjust to that. Final thing I'll probably say about onboarding is, You don't need to overthink it. You just need to put yourselves in the shoes of the person who's probably feeling awkward and lost in their first day to month on the job. You know, introduce them to the right people, build them up in front of new coworkers so they don't have to work to build a reputation. Give them one, right? Um, let them know they're valued, include them in as many conversations as possible, and definitely make sure that um, the staff that you're bringing them to, that they understand the rules of the road, that there's like no hazing, there's no, hey, let's give them the wrong code to the bathroom. Let's not reverse the P and the R on the keyboard on the, there are little silly things that, companies do and they don't know that they're losing good people when they do it. I've seen a lot of it. And if employees knew that the company's growth could very well depend on the success of this new hire, which is a true thing to say. I think they take it a lot more seriously, and not just fun and games time. Now, COVID makes things different, right? So there's probably a little bit less office kind of shenanigans, happening.
Definitely.
But when you hire people at the kind of entry level kind of like front lines, you there's an environment that can kind of just happen, right? So just kind of keep an eye on it. And that's what I'll say about that. But again, think about feeling like a fish out of water on your first day in any environment. First day on the job, first day at school, first day doing whatever, and try to think of those things that would have helped you feel better. Just a helpful hand, quick directions to the bathroom or the cafeteria, or how to get your parking validated or whatever. Just to let folks know that they will be helped, and that whatever awkwardness will probably go away quickly as they start to get acclimated.
Yeah, I think those are terrific points. And a word we use a lot on this podcast is authenticity, right? And whether it's your email marketing campaigns, your ads, how you're interacting with customers, whatever it may be, being authentic is very, very important. And you touched a little bit earlier on the fact that companies that take care of their employees see their employees then taking care of their customers, right? And but that all has to be in an authentic way. It's one thing for a company to say, hey, we're doing casual dress on Fridays and you're going to have ping pong in the lunchroom and all this stuff. That's one thing, right? That's not to say that those things don't show that there's a certain level of care there. But if that's not backed up by an overall company mission of, hey, we want to make sure that you're living a well balanced life, you're not overly stressed about, certain projects, whatever it may be. So we want you to, come to work with energy, with enthusiasm, with an ability to really connect with your coworkers at different points throughout the day. That's what then translates to people putting forth their best effort and their best energy and their best overall performance in taking care of the company's customers, right? And so I think the authenticity has to be really emphasized there, but that's not something that you can just kind of throw up on a big whiteboard and say, hey, we're an authentic company, right? That's lived out through the interactions between the management team, mid-level managers, frontline people, interns, people who are just starting, whatever it may be. And that's where that builds up over time and then gets translated to how your professionals, your sales team then interact with customers. You touched on things like onboarding and not giving people a hard time. And I understand there's the long time honored traditions of, oh, I went through this, so you have to too as the new guy, right? But some of that stuff at the end of the day really just takes away from the ultimate mission, and that's to support one another, build each other up to ultimately do your best work as individuals and as a team. And I do think that if there are any silver linings to COVID, perhaps some of that stuff gets weeded out a little bit just based on the length of the separation of people being in the office since it has been so much time that maybe some of those traditions in quotes get kind of weeded out, right? And people forget about them.
Yeah.
Now that's not to say that there is a whole separate area of focus or concern, and that different subcultures can emerge being in such a remote environment, right? People can have their separate group chats and all those types of things that it can be difficult to monitor, and that does affect culture, and it does affect how you know people coming into new roles view these opportunities and view how maybe the management team or coworkers view them, right? And so a lot of that stuff I think has to be evaluated and trying to be managed in its own separate way, in order so that those types of outside influencers don't ultimately affect how a person is communicating about your company to a customer, because it may not necessarily be in the words that they're saying or the script that they're reading or whatever it may be, but you can hear it in the tone of their voice, in their level of energy, enthusiasm, and all those things, regardless of whether it's nonverbal over the phone. Those things come across, and you can pick those out as a customer, as a prospect speaking to someone from a company. Those things are all very, very noticeable. So to that end, Matt, in shifting a little bit more towards scripts, I completely agree with you that you don't want to have someone come off as robotic, because they lose that energy, they lose that enthusiasm, they lose that inspiration and authenticity. So, do you recommend using scripts more word for word that people kind of put their own spin on, or would you recommend kind of using more of a bullet point format where people are speaking towards general points overall? Maybe they don't have everything listed out, and they're kind of maybe using some keywords or buzzwords to, almost as guideposts along the way. What's been your experience with kind of using scripts versus more free form? And do you have a recommendation as to maybe what's most effective for people in this day and age?
Yeah, I would lean on a script first. Everyone's going to have a different level of comfort with speaking kind of extemporaneously, and even bullets might not help them drill in as much as they might otherwise. I think teaching people how to read without sounding like they're reading is an easier skill to teach than maybe teaching people how to speak extemporaneously against 4 or 5 bullets,
Probably.
right? And again, I'm coming at this as someone that's had to maybe build teams at scale, but the easiest way to train people is to get them how to mimic first. But I think it's then necessary to level in or layer in the psychology behind why we're saying what we're saying, right? And if they understand why we say this versus that in a specific turn of phrase, or why we ask this question or this series of questions, and then they understand the reason behind it, I think you end up cranking out some good salespeople. Um, I think when it comes to the psychology in general, any company should just be asking themselves one question on the front lines. And it should be something as genuine as, can we help you? Right? If I'm on the front lines and I feel like I have to sell somebody, I might not want this job, especially if it's for legal services and it's someone that's going through a divorce and they're wondering if they should pick us or the guy down the street. And I'm trying to say, hey, yeah, you should pick us because we're the best thing since sliced bread. Maybe we're not for you, right? So dial it up a little bit and get inquisitory, and certainly lead with your points of differentiation. But it all boils down to whether or not you can help this person. And if they can feel that you can help them, because it'll come across, because it won't be BS, right? They'll tell naturally that you feel genuinely that you can help them. You'll end up booking a lot more demos, right? I think it's the frustration comes from those people who are like 50-50, and you said the thing that you really didn't really want to say to get them to book, and then they feel misrepresented or something when they end up taking the appointment, and maybe it's a waste of time, but you're trying to get the numbers up, and like, totally been there, totally get it. um, I think it's better to do a very authentic on inbound call process, maybe guided by a script but it should all be informed by, can I actually help you? Not can I take your money? Because anyone can do that, right? And you'll hold on to your people much longer with that thought process as well, because they're feeling like they're helping people, genuinely not getting over on people, which when you got to get up every single day to do the thing and not everyone's nice on the phone and it can get redundant and tedious, right? You got to feel good about what you're doing every day, and so just make sure that the floor is an ethical, moral. Can we help the people that are calling on the phone today? Type of floor, and I think you'll be rewarded with that mindset.
Right. To be successful in selling over the phone, you do have to have that spark, right? You have to have that energy or that inspiration somewhere that gets you up to do the same thing over and over. Because as you talked about, there are obstacles, right? It's not easy to do. People are not necessarily the friendliest when it comes to picking up a phone call, or especially if they're calling from a vulnerable or emotional place, as if they're dealing with a family law situation, or maybe interpreting a will if there's a loved one who's passed away, whatever it may be. And so you do have to have that sort of, I'll call it, renewable energy source within you to stay motivated and to keep going, because, and that does come from a place of understanding that what you're doing is important, does have value, and is coming from the right place. Because otherwise, it can get very demotivating pretty quickly. I do want to shift a little bit, Matt, towards thinking about some more practical matters. And we always try to make it practical on this podcast in terms of, how do you, as an attorney, an office manager, maybe a business manager overall for your firm, evaluate the performance, the progress, and really understand how well the people that you have on your phone team are doing? And there's one tool that I really want to highlight today that's really easy to use. It's very practical. It's got great ratings, and it's called Gong. And I myself, in old school, have gone through phone recordings individually. Had to take notes by hand or on the computer to understand. All right, this call went really well, or seemed to go really well. Here's a couple things that the sales rep did, or here's a couple things that I said, maybe if I'm evaluating my own performance. Well, the great news is that Gong is a deal intelligence tool that can kind of aggregate all this data for you. You can take a look at your phone calls, take a look at your call recordings or your transcriptions, and see exactly what your best reps did, what some key words were that ultimately led to a successful outcome, shows you maybe why certain people or certain calls didn't go as well as planned, and ultimately shows you kind of the clientele and the revenue amounts that came out of that experience, came out of those individual calls. And for me, this has really revolutionized how you can evaluate a remote sales team, but get better information with respect to how people are responding to different aspects of your value proposition as a company, right? If you're a family lawyer, for example, maybe you're doing really well in bringing on clients who are, um, you know, perhaps divorce candidates, but maybe they're divorce candidates without children, right? It's just a simple divorce proceeding. There's no custody battle, et cetera. And maybe there are certain aspects of why your firm is doing so well in getting those people to book a call or book an appointment with your partner and ultimately sign on as a client. This tool, Gong, Gong, will allow you to check out all of that information from any certain number of calls you really wish, and see exactly why you're bringing on those clients, and maybe you're not doing as well bringing on other candidates, such as families with custody battles, for example. So just something that I wanted to point out to people, because you don't necessarily have to be a very experienced sales and marketing professional to get this information and to ultimately move the needle for your team, right? You touched on at the very beginning of this podcast, sometimes things don't work because the manager style or the manager skills, or what they're supposedly adding to their team's abilities just aren't there, right? And sometimes it's the manager, sometimes it's not the lemons, so to speak. But this type of tool gives people the opportunity to develop some of those managerial insights that do move the needle and that do ultimately contribute to greater outcomes for their team and their company as a whole. So again, with a perspective of always trying to make it as practical as possible for people, I highly recommend checking out gong.io to check out this deal intelligence tool that can help you make your sales team better. So, Matt, before we finish up today, just want to turn it over to you to see if there's any last key insights that you may have for our listeners today when it comes to building the right sales team, making them effective at what they do, and ultimately driving the outcomes that we're really looking for at the end of the day.
I think intention is everything. So I'll end with that, right? Begin with the end in mind. Like, what is the goal? Is your goal to fill a seat or to build the best dang intake team that company has ever seen, right? Um, but it sounds very funny and maybe a little cliche to say it, but if you don't start that way, you're not going to get the results that you wanted. Think about when you have to be in the boardroom in 6 months and talk about, hey, here's the play that I made and here are the results. What do you want to be saying in that meeting, right? And so it's good to start any new initiative with that in mind. And so when it comes to, the hiring, what's the goal out of the hire? Is that person to fill a seat or to get X amount of more bookings than the last person that held that seat? As far as their development, where do we want to see them over time? And as far as how we manage them long term, is there a path for them? Do they know that there's a path for them? What are some things that we could be doing to get people to stick around? Because a revolving door is something that you never want. Um, you know, we used to have something called a retrain. And a retrain was something that you did when someone maybe had gone through the company training, but didn't maybe succeed like we thought they would. And so they would go through a bit of a retrain. And we would say we retrain to retain because there's really no greater cost at this stage of your business than an exodus of staff, right? If there's a cancer in the environment and the revolving door starts, it's going to bleed cash like no other aspect of your business because this is one of the most critical. And if you can't get these leads into your business, it's going to stop pretty quickly. So retrain to retain, meaning give your team the tools that they need to be effective on the phone, whether that's a good script, whether those are good responses to common objections, whether that's affecting the correct tone and pacing when they address the public, whether it's exuding the right amount of empathy. All these things are going to matter. We'll probably have another podcast in the future about how to do some of those things well. But for now, I will just say, if you give your people the tools to succeed and you hire them for the right reasons, I don't see why they shouldn't. I'll leave it there.
Certainly terrific advice, Matt. And first of all, the intentionality and the aspect of being able and willing to look internally as well and make sure that you as a manager or as an executive team are giving your people the right tools and putting them in a place to succeed. I think those two things are really key, and very glad that you pointed out both of them for our listeners today. As always, Matt, thank you so much again for taking the time to join us today. Thank you
My
to our
pleasure.
listeners for joining us for another episode of the MarketLeaf Solutions Legal Marketing Podcast. Check out our website, marketleafsolutions.com, our YouTube channel, our social media, and many other sources to get the latest tips, tricks, and everything you need to know when it comes to sales and marketing for your law firm. Have a great week, and we'll connect with you again soon.